Hello and welcome to this video on how to set up transaction journaling. My name is Patrick Payne. I am the Chief Technology Evangelist at ZoomAssist. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up transaction journaling, where you will have two systems, a primary and secondary system, in which all updates on the primary system are reflected on the secondary system. First, let's look at the type of system setup we'll be doing this demonstration on. We will be doing this with JBase for Linux on two CentOS virtual machines. On the left side of the screen, you will see that I have two sessions open on the sending machine and two sessions open on the receiving system. I already have JBase sessions on both systems. It is an account called Demo on the main system, and the actual directory is /JBase/demo. So in this example, JBase is where I would traditionally put all my different accounts under that system. On the secondary system, I already have in the system account a account for demos, but the demo account does not actually exist. So if I go out to Unix and go into JBase, you will see that there is no directory. The first thing we're going to do is show how to set up transaction logging in this account. JLogAdmin, and we're going to run it with a -R switch, which means we don't have to run as root, and most of the stuff we're doing here I'm not doing as root. And it will bring up a menu utility to help configure transaction logging. First, we're going to leave the transaction journal off, and we're going to actually use command line switches to actually turn it on and off. We're going to use this screen first to set this up. The first thing is what the current switch log set. You want to set this as when you first set it up to 1. I think on a brand new clean system this will be set to 0. Extended records, I recommend this is turned on. This will take additional metadata for files and directories and items and make sure those are copied over. The rest of these items you can leave at their defaults. You can read the instructions and find more about them. Log notify program, we're going to leave blank for now, but this and threshold is all tied to the log notify program. We're going to leave sync transactions as standard. We're going to leave encrypt records as off. Have transaction log sets, and within each set we can have multiple transaction log files. The reason that latter one exists is if you have a system that can only have a 2 gig file limit. A transaction log set is an entire transaction log, but if it exceeds 2 gigs, so for example, you're rotating your logs daily and you have a higher than 2 gig change rate, your transaction log will fail because it will hit the 2 gig limit. So you can actually go in here and say, set up multiple transaction log files, and the system will automatically switch from file 1 to file 2 to file 3 as it hits the file system limit. Most current systems that are 64-bit do not have this limitation anymore. Therefore, if you're on a system that does not have a 2 gig file limitation, I recommend you just set up 1 file per log set. In this example, I have created a directory called /tjlogs. In my first log set, I create the file called log1. To set up the second log set, you put 2 in here, and you set up the second log, and you continue to set up all your logs. And in this example, I have set up 3 transaction logs. Make sure also that you do not put where your transaction logs are under your JBase account. So you'll see that we did not put it in the /JBase account, because when we run backups, we do not want backups to be finding these logs. And make sure where you put those logs that you have enough disk space for your change rate based on how many logs you set up and what your daily change rate is. So once the log is set up, we will hit Control X and get back to Tickle. And we will first look at JLog status, which tells us the status of our entire transaction system. Now currently it is inactive, which means it's not turned on. It gives you a kickback of, it basically feeds back all that configuration information, tells you if everything's running and what log we're at, and what it's looking for starting to warn you that you're running out of disk space for the logs. And if we have anything in the log. So right now it says 0. We have nothing in the transaction log. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to turn transaction journaling on. So JLog admin, and it's a -A and on. Now if we go and look at JLog status, we will now see that our journal is turned on and active. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some files in this account so we can both see how the journal works, that it's logging, and that how we can turn it on, turn it off, and how then we can rotate it. So right now we're not doing replication, we're just doing journaling. So the first thing we do is let's use this make demo file, which is an included program with JBase for making a sample file. We say how many records we want, 5,000, and we were going to say, let's call it demo file 1. And with this, we're going to tell it to be a JP file, and it will create our file. So now we're going to say list demo file 1, and we have a file. Now we do JLog status. It now shows that we have 5,000 records in the transaction journal. Now I'm going to show you that there's a way to actually see that transaction journal. We have a special JEDI file that will create a stub file, a PIC file. It looks like a PIC file where you can actually see the transaction journal, even run reports against it. And what we do is we say create file, TJ1. You can actually name this anything you want, but we're going to call it TJ1. The type is TJ log. It creates a PIC file, creates a dictionary, but now you can say list TJ1 and it will actually show you what's sitting in the transaction journal. The first thing we're going to do is clone that system, our system on here, our sending system, and send it over to the receiving system. And the best way to do it is to use JBackup and back up the system and then restore it over here. I'm going to run you through the recommended process on doing that. So first of all, we're going to turn transaction journaling off. So now it's off. Then I want to truncate the log because we're going to make a clean backup here. Therefore, anything that's happened before the backup, I don't care about. So we're going to go ahead and clean out our transaction journal. We're on log number 1. Remember, we list TJ1, which is showing the current journal. And then I'm going to say JLog admin, and we're going to do a truncate on the first log. It warns you. I say yes. Now we do a JLog status. It should show that there's no records. And to verify that, we'll go to list TJ1, and you see the log is empty. And we see that the system is sitting inactive. Now, with everything cleaned up and the transaction journal's clean, I'm actually going to turn transaction journaling back on. And the reason I'm going to do that is if this was an active system where you could not get people to be logged off while you were doing this process, turning the journal on now with a clean journal, we'll start recording things starting now. We will run the backup now, and anything that's being updated during this process will be recorded to the transaction journal. There will be a small group of stuff that will be probably caught by the backup program and by the journal, but it'll be okay because the journal is just going to double up and repeat that update. JLog admin and turn this back on. First journal, now it's turned back on. Now we're going to go back out to Unix, and we're going to switch over to our temp directory, and we are going to run a backup. And the way you run backups with JBackup is you first use basically the way JBackup works is you actually pass to it all the file names you wish to back up. And we use a standard Unix command called find, which running find with a -print and putting it to any path will list through that and find every single file that you have in that directory tree. If you're on Windows, which does not have this find command, JBase supplies a JFind program that will do the same thing on Windows. So you just replace find with JFind on Windows. So once we run this, and we also want to make sure we're in the temp directory when we run this JBackup command, because JBackup will create some temporary files along with the backup file. So it has to have the ability to write to the directory you're in, and it's writing to the directory you run it from. So we're going to move to the temp directory and run this from the temp directory. So let's make sure. Yep, we're in temp. So we're going to run that same command again, and then we pipe it With the JBackup command, the -F, here we put what we want to call our backup file. I'm going to call this demo.backup. And we're going to put a -V, and that's going to print out what it's backing up while it's doing. It's important the JBackup program is kind of a combination between a zip or tar program and a classic PIC backup program, meaning when this runs and it comes across PIC files, it will actually save just the items from a PIC file and not the entire file. And that's why you can run this against a live system, because it is really looking through the directory, looking through a hash file and dumping them just like a tdump would do, or an account save on other systems. So it's hash file safe, and it will go in and save just the items and instructions on how to recreate the file on the second system. When it comes across non-PIC files like Unix directories, bins and libs, and it can be pictures or anything, it will just save the item as a tar or a zip normally does and save it. So it's a really neat utility. It'll find both items and be able to back up both items. And you'll see this once I run it. It ran through here. Our directory isn't very big, but you can see here at the end that it tells you what it backed up. 9 directories. It found 18 regular files. 4 of them were hash files for a total of 5,280 items saved. So now we have our backup file in this directory, and it was called demo.backup. We see it's 1.4 megs, very small file here. Now we need to move the file to the second system, and I'm going to just use secure copy, and I'm going to move demo.backup to the second system. Now I go over here. Let's do demo.backup, and there's my file. So now on this system, we are going to run a JRestore. Run JRestore, same switch, which is a -F, which is the name of our file, demo.backup. But first I want to look at it, and this is a -P with a verbose output. And what this will do is it will do a pretend restore and just shoot to the screen what it sees in the backup. But I like to do this first to make sure the backup worked, and then it found stuff. You can also run the same command over on the primary system to also verify your backup. So I run it, and it came back through and said, this is what I see, and it shows the path, and it by default is going to want to restore things to the same exact path. So again, we want to make sure on this system, on the secondary system, that you got everything set up and you have all the same permissions, meaning this user I'm using can write to this JBase directory. Now I run JRestore, take a -P off, and run it again, and it will restore our account. And see, there it is, and there's our file. So we have now restored the system from system 1 to system 2. Now we should be able to go back into JBase, log to demo, and our system should be there. And remember, we created a demo file, so we will go and say list demo.file1, and there's my file. And we will here go back over, and remember JLog status, we have the transaction journal running, but we haven't done anything. There's been no updates. But if updates would have happened, they'd been captured. And I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. To demonstrate if there were updates happening, now we're going to do a demo make file, and we're going to make a second one. So let's create another 5,000 records, and let's call it demo file 2. Still can't see what I'm typing, and we're going to do a JD file this time. This is Linux JBase 5.7, so we have the new dynamic files. Okay, so now list demo file 2. On the second system, demo file 2 does not exist. List our TJ log, and you see in the transaction journal that it has entries for that new demo 2 file. So we have transactions that were happening. This represents if the system was active and people were currently working on it. We have new transactions that need to come over. JLog status shows you overall what's happening, and listing of TJ1 will show you the detail. And again, you can actually run reports on this. You can actually list TJ1 with size equal to create file, and you'll see just the create file actions. JLog dupe. Put it in verbose mode. First, we're going to do a -E. Actually, before I do this, this -E is going to, we're going to create both a file where it's going to send errors, and we're also going to create a log file. The actual errors file is a classic pick file, or it's creating pick items. So you need to either create a hash file for this or a directory for this to write to. It doesn't create it for you automatically. So we're going to actually put this in a temp file and call it TJ get errors. But the first thing I need to do is make the directory. I'm going to do it as a directory. So I'm going to say create temp TJ get errors. The log file is a classic log file, like a Unix log file or Windows log file. It's just going to be a text file. It's appending things to, and it will create that file if it doesn't already exist. Daemon. So -E, TJ get errors, -L for the log file, TJ get log, and then we do a input section and an output section. Input is where is it getting the input from, and in this case it is actually the set is socket, meaning it is actually receiving it, and the host name, which is where it wants to listen. We're going to actually do straight IPs to keep this simple, but you either put IP or a DNS name, because that's what it's really doing, is it's saying what's the IP address I'm listening on, and then the port, what TCP/IP port you want it to listen on. Terminate says, hey, once it's done with the log, what do I do? And when you're doing a transaction replication, when it gets to the end of the log it's being sent, you want it to sit there and wait for more items to show up in the log, and it will wait for more entries to be sent across the socket. Then we say output. So we say, hey, where do you want to send this? And in this case, we're going to say set equal database. Now let's move over to the sending system, and we basically do the same JLog dupe command in verbose, but we start right away with where's the input, and the input is set equals current. Terminate equals wait, because the same way as we told the other side, we want this thing to say, hey, once you get to the end of that transaction journal, you just sit there and wait for JBase to put more things in that journal. Then we set up where it's going to go for output, and we say opposite of what we did on the receiving system. We're now sending this over a socket. The host name is, let's just put the IP address, and port equals 6767. I'm going to press enter, and as soon as I pressed enter, you saw it take the current transaction journal and replay all those transactions, and over on the second receiving system you saw its output say, hey, I'm taking those entries and committing them. So remember, these words are creation of the demo2 file that I did after the backup, and they've been sitting there in the transaction journal waiting. So now when I go to this system, which you can see when I listed demo file 2, it was not there. I will now list demo file 2, and it is now there. So at this point, we actually have transaction journaling configured, set up, and running. And now as you do stuff over here, it will automatically transaction journal items over. So for example, I'm going to go off and delete that file, demo file 2. And within 10 seconds, you should see the activity be recorded over here. And this will go here and say list demo file 2. It is no longer there. And with this running, our systems will now stay in sync. What I can move into next is talk about a little more advanced stuff about how this will work. And for example, log rotation. When you start and stop the function, the log rotation becomes important, because this thing will go back and replay the entire transaction log you're touching. And so to show that, let me demonstrate shutting the transaction journal down. We'll use JLog admin K and we just put asterisk here, and it will shut down the transaction journaling on the receiving system. Now, you didn't see it actually shut down yet because since it is talking to the sending system, it's going to sit and wait for the sending system to also be shut down. So I'm going to go over to this one and say JLog admin-r-k asterisk, and the system is shut down. Now remember, on this one we have JLog status. We still have our transaction journaling on, and we're still set on transaction log 1, and it still has 5,000 items in it. So if I go over here and start the journal back up and I run this one, you will see it play all the transactions again. It's not really causing any damage because it's just doing the same updates over again. But if you were to, let's say you had a log rotation policy of once a day, and let's say you do it at midnight, and so let's say during the day you got to around 5 o'clock in the evening, and you were to do what I just did, which is to shut it down and start it back up, it will replay that entire day's transactions again. And so it will, and since these logs are sequential, meaning if you updated the same, let's say, record 100 times in that day, this thing would actually replay it in order. And so it would actually revert back to what the system looked like earlier in the day and then replay all those transactions. So with that being said, if you do have to start and stop it, I recommend that you then rotate your transaction log to get yourself to a new clean transaction. So the first thing I would do is, before it shut down, I would go over here and rotate the log. So I'm going to say JLog admin and say, hey, rotate. And I'm going to use the word next because it will say, hey, if you use the word next, it will say, hey, fine, I'm going to move from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, then 3 back to 1. And it automatically initializes the next transaction log back to blank. So right now we're on 1. It has 5,000 items in it. We know that we're up to date. I'm going to tell it to rotate. So now when I JLog status, I'm on my second log. I can now go over here and JLog and shut this down. And shut down the main one. Now when I start them back up, you didn't see it replay all those earlier transactions. So I think that identifies the main items. Another important item is you can also control what is being transaction logged. So keep in mind that JBase, anything JBase touches will be transactioned. So, and that includes Unix directories. So if I'm over here and my BP file is an actual Unix directory. So if I go over here and look into BP, it is a Unix directory. So if I go in here now and create something called TJ, you will see that it moved my program over. So now if I go over here and list BP, there's my TJ program. But if I go out to Unix and do this outside JBase, so I'm going to create another one called test.tj2. There it is, but you don't see the journal grabbing it and moving, and that's because JBase didn't do it. You did it outside JBase. So over here, the file's not there. Now, if I just go in and touch the file, so here I'm just going to pull up with the editor and resave it. Now you see JBase grab it and move it. And this is very important. So if you are modifying things, and it includes if you're using Unix tools such as move or copy or making a new directory, you're going to have to manually do that stuff on the second system, or reclone the system. Just follow the initial steps we did, where remove it off the second system, rerun a new J backup, and do a new J restore over here, and that will get it back up to speed. Find ways to move them yourself, or if they're items within a directory, you can always create something that goes through and just touches all the files, and they will transaction log over. It's also important to note that there are things that the transaction journal does not catch. While it will see source code, as we're seeing here, it will not catch the compile. So it will not get compiled over on the second side. You can just go ahead and use your own tools to copy and replicate your bin and lib directories. Indexes, if you create new indexes, it's not sending that over to the second system, so the second system will not automatically create those indexes for you. You'll need to again do it manually and or reseed the system. So it's important to note that those are limitations on how this works. Secondly, if JBase is touching files with JBase outside your directory, and these are things that do not exist on the second system, it's going to start generating errors, because since JBase did touch the file, it will try to transaction journal it. And to show you an example, let's just say on this system you, under temp, had created your own directory to do something like scripts when you're doing automation and stuff. So you create this directory called scripts, and okay, good. This one's working. Okay, so let's say we say open and we're going to write so we've done this, and we are now going to say run test script. You'll see here that the log caught that we had a /temp scripts thing that needed to be updated, and so it sent it over to the second system. But the second system goes, I can't write to temp scripts because scripts doesn't exist. Because remember, over here I created it with the Unix command make dir, and this is traditionally where you start to see most of your errors. And if we're over on this system, we can now go to temp and list tjget errors. And there's our error. Log, it's written in here. It tells you what the problem was, what it was doing. It actually has the whole item down here. And this is the log threshold that there is actually a threshold in the system that says, hey, once it hits so many errors, it's actually going to shut down. And there's switches to tell how high to go. And this is where it's getting a count from. So I usually find that this is where I get most of my errors. And the truth is, you don't need to be logging this. So what you'll do is you'll go to this system and say, hey, what is the JStat on, and then we say J change mod -L, which means to not log temp scripts. Now, if we run our program again, you're not going to see a script entry over here. And you're also not going to see it in the TJ1. So you saw here, this is when we did the original write, but now that next one wasn't in there. In fact, if I can say delete temp scripts, well, let's list it first. Let's test item. So delete See, it's no longer logging it. And that's why this TJ1 file is very important. You actually start watching it for what it's transaction logging. And again, this is very important. So if you have something like a shared NFS drive or a Samba drive and you're reading and writing things from there, again, these things aren't going to exist on the second system. And while you can log them if you find a reason to it, as long as you have the directories in the second system, it would actually do it. I would also warn you that with JBase, you find you can do neat things like you could go into your etc config directory and maybe use JBase Gededitor to go and manipulate your etc password file or config file. Well, keep in mind that if you have JBase doing it, JBase is going to log it and try to write it to the second system. It's almost like an added slick feature here. So that's why I don't recommend running transaction journaling as root, because if you run it as root, it could, in theory, move a configuration item from the primary system to the secondary system. Now, at the same time, if you want to use JBase to do that for you, for example, these are two systems, and you do want to keep the etc password files in sync, then yes, run it as root. Make a JBase program that's open and closes and just touches the etc password file, and it will get moved. But just be warned that based on what you're touching and configuring, that could cause you issues. You can get a thing about that when it comes to the spooler. The JSpooler will actually attempt to log everything from one system to another. Those are usually items I go in and start setting in -L and turn them off. So hopefully this gives you a quick start to get the two environments up and running. Showed you how to stop and start it, how to rotate logs, how to see it moving things back and forth, and also gave you some caveats on how it's handling Unix and how things that you execute both outside the system, meaning, hey, why did this not log and move over? Plus, why is it logging this and moving it over? So again, thank you so much for watching this video, and hopefully it gives you the information you need. And any questions you have, please contact ZoomAssist, and we are more than happy to help. Thank you.